In this edition of the OT podcast,
bite off more than you can chew and then chew like hell. And that's basically been my motto through life.
Welcome to the OT podcast, which takes a deep dive into the topics affecting optometrists today. Each time we'll find a real expert in their field and attempt to pull everything we can out of their brain so it may reside in yours. This is the fourth episode in the series, and we're recording on the 11th of April 2023. You can listen to the other episodes with Nicola Logan, Ian Cameron and Keith Valentine on the OT website, on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you usually get your podcasts. In our fourth episode, we'll be trying to work out what makes a positive and productive place to work. But first, I'll introduce myself. My name's Kerry Smith-Janes. I'm the clinical multimedia editor for Optometry Today, and I'm also an IP qualified optometrist. I work in independent practice in Lancashire.
I'm Ian Beasley, Head of Education for the AOP, clinical editor of Optometry Today, and also a visiting lecturer at Aston University. So, Kerry, we're here to talk about positive and productive working environment. This got me thinking about my time in practice. I started out in the late 1980s, stayed in the same practice for 31 years up until 2020. I was thinking about my time, and was it really positive? Was it negative? I don't think it was either of those, really. I think I had perhaps a memory of it being quite neutral, if you like. Certainly in the late 1980s, there was no talk of staff well-being. There were no initiatives to kind of look after us. We just rocked up to work. We had a diary full of patients, and at the end of the month, we were given a small pot of gold for our trouble, and we cracked on with the next day. Now, you've also worked primarily in independent practice, I think, Kerry. So is your experience any different to that?
Yeah, I mean, I started out in a multiple at DNA. It was the late 90s. And I just remember there was quite a lot of smoke coming from the staff room that would just waft into my test room and break up people's tear films. So, yeah, staff well-being. I don't know whether we did particularly do anything in terms of that at the time. I mean, nowadays there's a lot more initiatives. You've got sort of cycle to work schemes, and now there's fruit in the practice to try and get everyone to eat their 5 a day. So there's a lot of deliberate attempts to improve well-being, but I always think it's about the people around you. It's very much about the leadership and the way their attitude filters down to the rest of the team, really.
I think that's the perfect place to introduce our guest this morning, so he can share his perspective on positive working environment. So I'm really pleased to welcome Peter Frampton. Peter, before we sort of delve in and have a chat with you, I'll just do a formal intro, if that's okay with you. So Dr Peter Frampton was one of the first independent prescribing optometrists in the UK, gaining his diploma in therapeutics in 2009. He was made a Fellow of the College of Optometrists in 2011 in recognition of his commitment to clinical excellence, has a doctorate from Aston University, a stash of industry awards, and even a degree in Australian environmental studies. So Peter, welcome to the OT podcast, and happy birthday.
Thank you very much. Yeah, 64 today. It's a bit of a blighter, but, you know, you got to go with it. It's all I got.
Now, Peter, when Kerry and I were chatting in the build-up to this podcast, we both met you, of course, and Kerry made the astute observation that your accent would suggest you've not always lived in Northumberland. So perhaps we can begin by you sharing with us, you know, what brought you to the other side of the world, and why have you stayed?
Yes. Thank you. Now, I've got a couple of points to make first, because I want people to keep listening. And I do think that if it's all just about me, I'm not sure that it's got to have some import to the people who are listening. And I do actually think that my story could have, particularly for young people and particularly young optometrists. Because, you know, at a very young age, we have to make some really serious decisions about our futures. And I'm not sure that everyone at that age is in a position to make them. And so I decided to have a theme to this little chat. I've decided to call it Success via the Unplanned Route, because I haven't planned anything. When I look back, I realise that almost anything I've done has ever been planned. It's just fallen. What has led to my success, though, I believe, is my ability to see an opportunity when it arrives, seize it, and run with it. I never intended to be in England. I never intended to be an optometrist, never intended to be an optometrist. And yet I do believe I'm actually quite a good one. It doesn't have to be preordained that you're a certain thing. And opportunities come, and I've had a really, really interesting time, I think. And I think it does help young people to think, yeah, there are routes to places and they don't always have to be planned out. So that's what I'm hoping that today will do. I mean, even my first degree, environmental studies, that even came as a bolt. It was a new degree. I was in my senior year at school and this person came from that particular university, said, look, there's a degree. I thought, oh gosh, that pretty much reflects how I feel about the world, so I'll do it. So the university had no, or that course anyway, had no kudos. It had no reputation. I can then say to myself, well, you know, I was very much in the vanguard in the late 70s, early 80s of this group of people. And this university now has a hell of a reputation. But it certainly didn't when I exited. But I still loved the course, and it certainly does reflect how I think. 40 odd years on, it's gone full circle, and suddenly my past degree is now coming up in talks I do, because it's actually suddenly quite relevant. It should have been relevant 45 years ago, but it is now becoming very relevant. So I grew up in Brisbane, or south of Brisbane, in the country, and I just had in my opinion, an ideal young life. You know, basically just ran around the bush. We didn't even wear shoes, you know. And we used to find old ruined houses in the bush. I used to go out and see wombats, and it was all just there for me. And it was just a wonderful way of growing up. And although I'm pretty convinced I will never live in Australia again, I'm very, very proud or very happy to have had the upbringing that I had there, because you couldn't have got it anywhere else. And I think my love of the environment has always been with me, and it used to get scoffed a lot, actually, but it's not getting scoffed anymore, and we do have to be very serious about it. And my love of the environment is just imbued in me, and it's imbued in my practice now. I was only about 8 at the time when I witnessed a gum tree get chopped down to make way in my country school for a new football field. And everyone else, all the boys were cheering, and I was the only one there that thought, this doesn't seem quite right to me. And I felt it was rather sad. Now, I didn't let on, of course, because you don't let your peer group know that you're a bit of a wet. But so you don't let on to other 8-year-old boys about that. But you know, it was a magnificent tree, and I thought it was tragic. And I think back on that period now, at that time, and I think, well, it says something about me. I don't think you're taught this stuff. I was never taught this stuff. And indeed, until I was at university doing environmental science, was the first time you really talked to people who actually paid that much attention to it. The degree was very, very good, but when I got out of it, I couldn't get a job, basically. So I sat there and I thought, well, what am I going to do? And this is the serendipity of it. I just opened up a newspaper and they were advertising for ambulance officers. And I thought, I wonder if I could do that. I wasn't even sure I wouldn't faint at the sight of blood. But I thought, you know what, I'll have a crack at that. Bless them, they let me in. Now, when I say ambulance officer, I do mean ambulance officer. There were no paramedics then, right? Not in Brisbane. I'd like to be able to call myself a paramedic, but the last thing I was a paramedic. And so I was only 20 when I joined them, and that was a bit too young. You're supposed to be 21, but they let me in. And that's when I really, to a large extent, found myself. Everything I've done in my life has helped me in some way come forward, right? And I think the ambulance was fantastic. I loved it. It could be hell on earth if you were stuck in a car or unit, but with someone you didn't like. That could be hell. But once I got into my second year there, I was made a senior and I had my own vehicle, and I had a partner, a guy called Lindsay Johnson, and we just got on. And it was just a phenomenal 2 years. At the time, they were trying to drive forward the principles of paramedicine. And a bit like I've experienced or I've seen happen with optometry, people don't take new things. The old guard in the ambulance did not want paramedicine. They didn't want it. It was going to be a lot of hard graft and a lot of learning that they didn't feel, and they could rationalise it, they could always rationalise it. Just as people who didn't want to do IP could rationalise it back in 2000, when AS first came out in 2004 or whatever, they could rationalise it. But the bottom line is it's because they didn't want to get out of their bubble of comfort. And so at this stage of the game, when I realised the battle that was going to happen, and I thought otherwise there's nowhere forward, I'd already climbed effectively to the top. So I started doing night schools then. I went and did physics and chemistry at night school. So I figured, I'll decide what I'm going to do. So I did physics and chemistry at night school while I was in the ambulance. And then I thought, all right, what am I going to do? And a mate of mine, a really good mate, was an industrial chemist. And he says, well, Pete, I quite like my job. I quite like being an industrial chemist. Why don't you do that? I said, okay, fine, I'll do that. So I went to QIT, Queensland Institute of Technology. It's now QUT, and I enrolled in industrial chemistry. Now, this is my convoluted route into optometry, and seriously, this is true. I spent 2 weeks in chemistry and realised I was not a chemist. And I went to the faculty next door and asked them to let me in, and they did. And that was optometry. And that's how I got to be an optometrist. And does that make me a worse optometrist because I'd never even heard of it before, really? I think the thing for young optoms now is you can make your own future. And you can take optometry and you can take it down different avenues now. You've just got to work hard at it. And when I was in optometry in Brisbane, Australia, we couldn't dilate, we couldn't use cycloplegia. We were truly refractionists, if you will, just like we were in Britain. And look at us now. And it's only because certain people have pushed the envelope, despite other people perhaps not wanting it because it took them out of their comfort zone. And I'm not sure I know this as a fact, but I have heard that there was a high retirement rate of optometrists in Scotland when they brought in the new rules. And I'm sure big change will make some people think, well, I've had enough, but it's the only way forward. And I've absolutely loved it. So that's my little story of how I got into optometry. I'm not sure that actually was the right question. What was the question you asked?
I think this is part B of the question that we might be coming to now. So it's really, how did you then end up in the UK?
Well, I was happy to leave Australia. Queensland in the 80s, especially if you're a bit environmentally, was not a particularly great place to be. And the Aboriginals in Australia have had and have the most horrific treatment. And I'd fundamentally had enough. And I wanted to work in Britain because I was a bit of a goth back then, and it's so much easier being a goth when you're in Britain when it's raining than when you're being a goth in Brisbane, Australia, when it's really sunny and the coats are really hot. So I thought, I'll blow this. I'll go to England. Life in a northern town and all that was out on the radio at the time, and I thought, I've got to be a part of this doer place. So, like all Australians, you sort of think, I'll drift over there. I'll convert my qualification at what was then the London Refraction Hospital, and work for a year. And then, tool back probably. But again, opportunities came along. I worked for a while for a company, and the company was quietly getting on with the job of going bust. And suddenly they said, look, we're going to sell up. And at that point, I had two options. I could either become an employed optometrist for somebody else, or I could buy the practice. And so I talked to my then wife, I had married someone by then, and said, look, what about it? And we thought, blow it. It was the only way I think you can actually drive a personalised future for yourself. Otherwise, you are just someone else's tool, if you will. I say that in the nicest possible way, but you are doing someone else's plan. And if you want to build your own plan, you've got to some extent, have some level of autonomy. So I did that, but that was so I bought that in 1993, and it was an absolutely classic 80s-esque practice. You have to use your right leg to pump the chair up, and you could spin it around and cut people's hair at the same time, and it was basically one of those practices. But it was all up from there because there was no way it could go down, basically. But once I'd done that, you are then somewhat stuck in England. I was just offered a job, incidentally, in Northumberland. I just thought, oh, blow it, I'll stay there for a while after I left England. I left London, I should say, sorry. So I had this little practice, and I worked at it, and there was only me and two other people, and we built it and built and built it. And then suddenly, again, opportunities started coming in. Now, at that stage, I call them my dark years, because what I was trying to do then was learn how to be a business person. And optometry very much took a back step, actually. And I look back on those days with some level of regret. Although, you've got to learn how to be a businessman. You've got to understand profit and loss. You've got to understand balance sheets. If you're going to talk to accountants, you have to understand those things. So I taught myself all that stuff. And then an opportunity came when the landlord wanted to sell the units off, and I thought, well, blow this, I'll buy one. And then a corner unit came up and thought, well, blow it, let's do that. So I bought this corner unit, and that just skyrocketed the practice. And then I bought another floor, which nearly broke me. I nearly went out of business then. Really overshot the mark on that one. But it all worked out in the end. I remember someone saying, oh, you're going to go out of business. And I said, I don't need anyone's help making me go out of business. I can do it all by myself. And I nearly did, seriously. Anyway, and so opportunities came, and I suddenly owned the building, and I could work harder and develop it. And that's how I ended up staying in Britain, because once you've got a practice, you can't go anywhere else, really, and so although I'd visit Australia relatively often, but it would only be for 3 or 4 weeks, because, I was a one-man band and I couldn't afford to be out of the practice for very long. So that was the dark time. And then basically I had my serendipity, and or had my epiphany, I should say. And the one thing I can say for me is, at least I did back then go to conferences. Because back then, of course, they were the days you didn't even have to have CET or CPD. You could exit your profession no better informed than when you entered it. But at least I did go to meetings, and I went to the BCLA, and there was a workshop there on therapeutics by Michael Doughty. And I sat in that lecture, and I thought, my God, I actually don't understand a half of what this man is saying. And I could have easily come back to Northumberland and thought, yeah, okay, I didn't get a point for it actually, but anyway, I could come back and I could forget that. But I didn't. It was actually the real kick I needed to think, you know what, I'm not prepared to work this way in optometry anymore. And this is years before IP or AS or SP, but I just thought, no, this is not going to work for me. I'm not happy with the way I'm doing this. And I started changing the practice. We put in fee-based systems and all the rest of it for contact lenses. And I started educating myself. So the first thing I did before anything else, I did a master's degree in therapeutics at Bradford. And that was really, really good. That was in 2000 or 2001. And I learned so much from that. That was a really, really good degree to have. And my dissertation went down really well. And okay, this was ages before AS. And so I couldn't prescribe from that or anything else, not legally. But I could certainly inform GPs better. I could interact with my patients so much better. I could prescribe drugs via GPs by saying, I've seen this person, would you mind prescribing this? And doing this long convoluted route, it gave me the chance to get really good rapport with GPs. They trusted me. I started off on easy drugs, and so although I couldn't prescribe, I did prescribe for many years before AS came along. And that was the start of it all, and I think sometimes, somewhere, every young person has to say, am I prepared to keep working this way? And some people might be, and that's fine. But if you're not, don't think you're trapped. You can do what you need to do. I had a young lady join me. She got in touch with me because she was self-funding IP. This is some years ago. And she wanted to talk to me about how valuable it is and is there any valid use to it, because she worked in an environment where her bosses didn't see the point, they didn't give her any support, and even her colleagues were all saying, what the heck are you doing this? You don't come out on Saturday nights with us anymore, you're too busy studying. And so I appreciate her so much, I gave her a job. And she did her IP via my practice, and it was great. And sadly for me, she went and moved to London. But, it just goes to show that your peer pressures, the people that around you dictate what you do. And I think this comes on to that last question about how do you engender a good environment for workforces. It's got to be there in place. And she did all that, and she was doing it all by herself, and she was lost. She was absolutely lost because she was not getting any support from anyone else. So anyway, back to me again. I went off. I was at a surgical conference where they were teaching us how to do corneal transplants. On cattle eyes, and it proved one thing to me: I'm no surgeon, right? I mean, it was, dear Lord, it was pathetic. But anyway, while I was down there, I met this extremely eccentric chap called Deacon Hull, who said to me at the time, he says, you know what, you lads, you should come along. We're starting this thing called additional supply. And I hadn't even finished my dissertation yet on my master's, but I thought, this sounds interesting. I want a piece of this. And again, there was no suggestion ever that this was going to actually come out, right? This was all so new. But I thought, nah, it sounds interesting. I want to be a part of it. So I just hooked onto that. And so while I was finishing my master's degree, I was already starting the additional supply supplementary prescribing. There was no IP. Down at the Institute of Optometry. That's where it started, I think, as I recall. And it was hard yakka. At the time, I ran a motto that I developed from Australia. I said, bite off more than you can chew and then chew like hell. And that's basically been my motto through life. So we just doubled this stuff up, and it was really, really exciting. And I remember we were down there and they said, incidentally, we can do an exam for you today if you want to. And so it was absolutely bolted onto us. And I thought, we'll blow it. We're here now. We might as well have a crack. We can only fail. So we did. I did my first OSCEs, my first practical, and did some exams. And at the time we were being examined, apparently the examiners were being examined. It was that new. So, I'm proud to say that, or to think that I do bite the bullet. I do take things on. There doesn't have to be a full-on proof that it's going to come to any level of paying fruition. Back then, you used to get a lot of conventional wisdoms thrown at you. And one of the conventional wisdoms back then was, you'll never get paid for it. It's no point. Why do it? No care trust is going to pay us. It's completely wasted time. And you used to get this a lot. And you think, well, actually, all education is good. And whether it came to fruition or not, I was going to be a much better optometrist for it. And so I kept on going with it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was hard graft, but we got through it. And then suddenly IP came on, and I'm not normally one to go to graduations or anything like that, but I thought, I had to work fast on this because suddenly the exam was in November 2009 and I had to do Module 3 at Caledonia University and get it because I thought, if there's one thing that would be really neat to be able to say you're the first IP, being able to say you're the second isn't quite the same. So I thought, I'm gonna try to do this, and we did. So we got through, sat the exam in Glasgow, and suddenly I was IP, and I thought that it was just great. And then the learning started even further, and that's how I got to where I am. The doctorate thing, I think, was more just affectation, to be honest, mate. I thought, I've done everything else. I thought I was now at that stage where I'm concentrating more on the practice and my colleagues. So I thought, I don't really want to get any more qualifications myself now. But I thought, well, I could finish as a doctor. It might be quite nice. So that's why I did the doctorate at Aston. And again, I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. I always say to people, they'd see me working on a Saturday and Sunday at my table in my kitchen typing away. I said, look, if you call it a hobby, it's great. If you call it work, it's just a grim 5 years, But if you call it a hobby, it's absolutely fantastic. And I think with that doctorate is great because I picked what I wanted to do. I think some PhDs, you plumb the depths of something really intensely, but it's quite a narrow band. I was able to pick something that was actually clinical. So it actually did have impact on my work as well. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I got that finally in 2017. And so that's my educational standards finished. Believe me, I'm not going any further. There'd be divorce on the table if I took this any further. But the work doesn't stop.
You started talking about your workplace, and we just wanted to know, well, what's important to you in the workplace? How do you create that positive, productive place to work?
My whole growth of my business has been the growth of that. The opportunities that you latch onto aren't always necessarily the fact that a unit comes for sale and you bought it. It can be recognising people. And I am extremely proud that my newest colleague is 8 years, has been with me 8 years. Andrew, one of my other IP optoms, I'll tell you his story because this is really part of it. He came to me in 96 as a trainee DO. He qualified as a DO, an excellent DO, and his enthusiasm was so marked that we put him through the CLO course. He did the CLO course, and then our contact lens business just skyrocketed because an optom could be sitting in their little room and they're thinking, oh, do I mention contact lenses? It's going to take up a lot of time. It's going to do. Suddenly you can say, look, Andrew, he was doing his day job, being a DO, and if we said, look, do you want to try contact lenses? In they went with Andrew. We built an extra room. It was a very small room, but we built him an extra room, and it just took off. And then along comes that Bradford. I'm going to call it a conversion course, but it's not. It's got a better name than that because it really is a degree, right? And we put him through that, and it was hard yakka. It was hard yakka for him, and it was hard yakka for us because he was out of the practice all week. Before you go there, you have to do a year's worth of other stuff first, and then you go and spend a year at Bradford Uni, but then he became an optometrist. And the long game, I definitely feel we play the long game. You've got to. I never use locum optometrists. I don't feel they fit there's some great locum optoms, right? And there's great everything. But we want continuity of care. And something I've been building for all along is to have a system where patients know they're going to see someone who's been there for a long time. And Andrew is a classic example of that. You know, I've worked with him. He's now into his 27th year with me. And not many practices can say that, unless they're an owner, can say that, I don't believe. And so then he went through IP. We put him through IP. He's now got a glaucoma certificate, which we put him through. And it's just the story. So he's so imbued in it, and so are all of my other colleagues. He's one of my best examples, I think. I'm very proud of creating that boy. But Debbie, our other IP optom, she came to us in as a pre-reg in 2011, say, and she's never left. And so we have three full-time IP optoms, which means we can now offer a full service. So patients know that if they have any problem, they do not go to a doctor, they do not go to an eye hospital, they come to us. And if I'm off, Andrew and Debbie are in, or whatever. So we have full cover. And the same goes for all my colleagues. I'm saying, you know, you're asking me how I fulfill. You see, I don't think any of us are taught how to do HR. I mean, I did Investors in People ages ago, and certainly that gives you a plaque you can stick on the wall. But I think there's a lot of people out there who potentially can tick all boxes and say, we've done this, this, and this. But the real strength is believing in it, is absolutely believing in it and believing in your people. And for instance, I don't call all of my colleagues are my colleagues. There's not one of them is a staff member or an employee. And I know that sounds petty, but they feel part of a team. And again, the longevity of all of my colleagues is, to me, says it all. As many mistakes as I make, and we all make mistakes, and I stress people, the very way I work stresses people. Because you cannot plan emergencies. We're always adapting to the state of play at the time. You know, the more popular you become, and especially after COVID, people are coming to us now for general health things. I mean, not they don't want warts taken off their toes or anything. I mean, nothing like that. But, you know, if they've got a general health issue, they'll be coming to us. And so the stress levels on us is really quite high. And we have to keep adapting to the environment in which we're working. You know, you can't say, this is the plan of how it's going to work. And we've had more permutations on how to work the clinic, because you'll never know when an emergency is going to walk in the door. But with 4 full-time optoms and 2 pre-regs, we usually can manipulate it these days that we can fit people in, and we effectively never turn patients away. And they're triaged very, very well by my colleagues. Their triage sheets are just awesome, and they can really do a fantastic job. So it's how you invest in people, and when you see someone that's valuable, you keep them. You know, Andrew I kept, Debbie I kept, and all my other colleagues I kept. We have one young lady called Laura who came to us as a work experience girl. Then she came on as a Saturday girl. She went off and did a degree in design. And so I created a job for her because I did not want to lose her. And she is now our social media design, all the stuff we do in the practice, she designs it. And we have created that role, and she is an extremely valuable member of the team. But I could have so easily lost her because I said, well, there's no role for you here. And Andrea, our manager, she comes from a background. She came to me for a year. She said, look, I'll give you a year, Peter, and then after that I'm moving to York. And that was 18 years ago. And she allowed me to take the practice to another level, because at that stage I was taking a second floor because we wanted to expand and it was risky. And she said, I'll come for a year and see how just help you through that bit, because it gets to a point where your practice is so big, optometrists, independent optometrists have to do everything. They have to be an optom, they have to be a manager, they have to be HR, they have to do all those things together, and it's just impossible. And I thought, well, I have to either remain an optometrist, and this was before I was even AS. So I have to either be an optometrist or be a manager. I cannot be both now. In came Andrea, who came to me for a year, and then I basically nailed the feet to the floor and she couldn't get away. And now she's actually a partner. Doing a course on HR, I think, gives you a lot of theory, but it's how you interact with your colleagues. And they are colleagues, they're not staff. They're actually colleagues. And we have lots of little mantras in our practice that help us take it forward, and we all believe in it, including the environmental stuff. You know, the recycling of everything. Everybody in my practice believes in it, and because they believe in it, they are part of the team. And I was never taught in it, and I don't think doing courses on HR can necessarily, I'm sure they're really good, but they can't necessarily make you a human being that interacts with people. I think that's the most important bit. And I do consider them all my friends, and I say to them flat that I will not let them down. And if I could suddenly sell that business out from under them and go, and they know that I wouldn't do it. And you've got to have this relationship with your colleagues, and then all of your patients come along. They all know that I'm an environmental nincompoop. They all know. They know what I do. They know, and I know them, and I know what they do, and I know their lives, and that's an interaction that you cannot do in 20 minutes. And it's knowing patients come back year after year after year because they actually trust you. And, you know, I have this thing. I said loyalty comes from trust. Trust comes from understanding. Understanding comes from education, and education takes time. And I always say we're in for the long haul. We're not in for the short-term sting. And all my colleagues, all these things that I write, it's imbued in our very culture. And everybody knows it. And we will not let patients down, and they all know I will not let them down. And that is really, really crucial. Because I think you do hear about places that as soon as the wheels fall off, people aren't pulling together, people are blaming. And the buck stops with me. And that's a fact. And they know it. And they know that I will never, ever let any of them down. And, you know, you don't get taught that, I don't think. You know, why you can do all these fancy courses and all this HR, but the bottom line is it's trust. And if your colleagues trust you because you deserve to be trusted, and if you trust all of them because they deserve to be trusted, then the patient journey is just easy and everything swings along quite nicely.
So, Peter, you touched on there about some of the sustainability initiatives in your practice. So can you tell us a bit about that? How are you making the practice more sustainable? And particularly, one of the things we want to ask you is sustainability a cost we need to factor into practice costs, or is it possible to save money whilst being sustainable?
Right, nice question. It should be factored in such a profound way. What I say to people about doing all this stuff is just start. Start easy. There are so many things you can do very, very easily. If you want to get really complicated about this, you've got 3 levels. Economic models have historically evolved out of seismic changes in our society. So the original classic comes out of the Industrial Revolution. That changed the model of economy. And it was the classical model just said, let it run. It was really Darwinian. You just let things run. And if something went extinct, it went extinct. And then we get Keynesian economics as a result of the Great Depression. And suddenly this guy decided that we better have some controls put in. The point I'm making with that is every great model of economics comes out of some seismic change in our society. And there is now evolving, or has been evolving for some time, environmental economics and also ecological economics, which are two different schools. And they're saying that the cost within a business is far greater than the simple cost that we do. And that's a huge picture where being in a bigger group makes a lot of difference to this, because you cannot trace everything you do. So anyway, the point is that at a surface level, you can still do a lot. You know, recycling contact lenses, recycling glasses. The company we use is based in Darwin, in I think that's in Lancashire, I don't know, somewhere or other. And thank you very much. And they'll recycle loads and loads of things, minims, everything. So, you know, that's a huge thing because microplastics that get into the ecosystems are terrible. And then you can do all your normal recycling and so on. Within the practice, we don't have any packaging. You know, we had paper bags years and years and years before, you know, they were forced upon people. And there's so many little things you can do. We're a corporate member of Northumberland Wildlife Trust, so we help there, and we have visitors come in about environment. We had a whole. This was just before COVID, actually. We had an entire group of brownies come in because they'd heard that we were recycling things, and I was so amazed by these young people. It was awesome, their commitment to it and their mission statements. If a politician had a mission statement like those brownies, we'd be in a much better place. It was absolutely remarkable. And I was even given a badge. I wear with pride on my Sea Shepherd cycling jersey, Future Girl. I am a future girl. Their commitment, I always thought brownies just did things like, you know, knit or something, I don't know. But, you know, they weren't like the Cubs. The Cubs went off and burnt things and brownies always did much nice things. Well, no, these people are serious. I mean, this is serious stuff. And their commitment to the environment is just absolutely awesome. And because of this, our whole practice is imbued with this idea of it. And patients, I think it reflects the patients that are attracted to our practice. They're intelligent people. They come and they know what we do. They know that I cycle everywhere. And it's just absolutely imbued in our culture. The big thing, though, is taking it forward, the economics of it. I don't, for instance, have a modern slavery policy because I know that it would be a lie. Because I can't trace back everything that I purchase right through to know that there's not some fashion thing somewhere in Bangladesh. But that's the next step. But, you know, that's the point. If you hit people hard with all of that stuff and about environmental economics, which means the balance sheet becomes a totally different animal. If Exxon have an oil spill and they pollute it, that's part of their cost. That's not a public cost, that's their cost. And if you start factoring in these costs into your profit and loss, it does change the economics. And so if every company had to pay every cost, and if you just do this on Wikipedia, the example is, it's to give a really simple example, I say, just say you live on a flat on the top floor and you have a water leak. It's not just your house your flat you have to fix. You have to fix the flat below. So the costs are different, and this is serious. So seismic changes in our environments change our economics. And in a few more years' time, environmental economics will be the mainstay, I believe, right? And it's just always been interesting to me that it takes an absolute kick in the face to make people change models. So the very fact that Keynesian economics came out of the Great Depression, where they suddenly decided that you need to have government interventions to stabilise things, that was the big change over classical. Now we're saying, the environment has to be taken into account when we're doing the economics. You can't have companies just saying, this is the bottom line. We're stripping out all these trees in the Amazon and it's only costing us this much, so we can sell the furniture for this much. When actually the cultural implications, the environmental implications are so profound. The cost for us all is way higher. And people need to think about it. When they think about simple economics, it's not quite like that. But anyway, it's if you hit people all that stuff straight up, you got to say, people can give up. And we mustn't give up. We must look at our own little environments and say, I can help here. I can do things. I can recycle things. I can push it out there. I can make it a priority. It's so imbued in all of our stuff. Patients come to us about it. They know about it. And I had a young lady came to me once, and she was going to change. She wanted to change to monthly contact lenses. And I said to my colleague, what the heck does she want to do that? It's not all that. It's not the best option. And my colleague said, oh, well, actually, she's been to Indonesia and she's been seeing the plastic pollution there and she wants to do something about it. So she wants to not have dailies. I said, wow, get this young lady in. I need to talk to this woman, right? This woman is brilliant, right? And so she kindly came in. I wrote a newsletter about her, and I discussed. And we'd already. This is some years ago. I'd already started recycling contact lenses. So I came in and did a chat to her, showed her what we were doing, explained the benefits, health benefits of dailies and what we're doing and so on. And she stayed on dailies. And honestly, when she comes in, bless her, she comes in with, with just bags of lenses, blister packs, the whole lot. And I know, and J&J did the same, and I applaud them for that. They were paying via this TerraCycle company in Darwin, but they were doing it themselves. They were paying. And I don't see why they should have to pay. I think we should pay. And I'm happy to pay because it's part of what we do to help patients. And actually, I'm really proud that on our Northumberland Wildlife Trust, we're a corporate member of this group, because I decided once, I said, look, I'm a member of Greenpeace, I'm a member of Sea Shepherd, I'm, you might want to edit this out, I am XR, and I thought, I don't do anything local. And I cycle through Northumberland Wildlife Trust area on the way to work every day. So I thought, I should really take a part in that. And I did. And my quote is still on their website, which I gave, which I will read to you actually. I will read part of it anyway. Sometimes business benefits are not immediately quantifiable. However, we believe loyalty comes from trust. My patient support and therefore my business success reflects their commitment to a broader, principled business model. So please, everyone, by doing your little bit, we will help ensure future generations enjoy the beauty and diversity of natural Northumberland. And that's on their website, and I'm really chuffed at that. It's been on there for some time. But it is important, and I think I pay them so much a year. You could say there's no business benefit to that, but there actually is. There's an unquantifiable business benefit to that. And I think the more we show it now, the better. So there we are.
Peter, I think that's a really nice place to wrap things up. Thank you for giving up so much of your time, especially on your birthday, and for sharing your wisdom and thoughts with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a delight. I hope I didn't blather too long.